Hello and welcome to the Manitoba School Board's webinar on Getting from Here to There, or as it's more commonly known, developing a vision for your division. I hope you can all hear me, and we usually play some music in advance of the webinar starting so you can adjust your volume. I hope you can hear my voice okay. I'm just going to say first that my name is Janice Arnold and I'm the Board Development Consultant at the Manitoba School Boards Association. So if you're listening to this as a recording, the original air date was October 28th. Therefore, interactive questions will be unavailable to you in that version, but you can certainly contact our office if you do have any follow-up questions. There, I hope you can see the title slide there, and as shown in this title slide, the webinar is part of the E2G series on effective and efficient governance. E2G is part of the standards framework developed by MSBA for effective and efficient governance. Our framework, it's a piece that is common to many school board associations, and it looks at how optimally functioning school boards strike a balance between efficiency and effectiveness. So it addresses how school boards meet their responsibilities to students and communities to the highest of standards. MSBA's E2G package is meant for use by trustees and contains many governance resources such as these live or recorded webinars. We'll be continuing with the series well into next year, and we will also have guest presenters. Our first guest presenter is going to be at the beginning of February. The package also includes 5 to 10-minute trainer videos, and these are known as our Division Dispatches series. Those are found on the MSBA YouTube channel. We also have in-person workshops which can be booked through this office. Just make a quick call in. It's 233-1595. And we also have some takeaway material available through these mediums and on our website. So if you look on the screen there, you can see the E2G logo. It's on the bottom right, and it's really the identifier for all the pieces in this package. I'm back at this presentation and start the webcam here. So hi everybody, Janice Arnold here. I will also explain a little bit for those of you that haven't been on the webinar before. If you look down at your screen on the bottom right-hand side, there's a place to type in some questions. Feel free to type a question in any time as we go throughout the presentation. We're doing it this way rather than having verbal questions, because I know that we often have groups that listen together. Several trustees will come in together and listen from the division office or just listen together elsewhere, and it just avoids a lot of noise in the background. If you find that it's quite quick to putting your questions in there, you're worrying about typos, if you want to flip back and forth between something like Notes or Microsoft Word, you can do that and then copy and paste into that section on the left. Your questions you put in actually in the bar in the bottom section of that square. Okay, so I'm going to adjust my screen here and go on to the next part. Oh, and by the way, I will be reading out the questions that you put into that pod at the end. We'll go through all of them at the end, and others don't see what's coming in there as questions. I'll read those out and then answer them as we go along. There we go. I hope you're clicking along with me, and it doesn't take too long for your screen to load. As part of the introduction to E2G in a Division Dispatch that was just published about 3 weeks ago, that's one of the YouTube videos, I outlined 3 key jobs of any school board. One of them, the first one, was to represent and be accountable to the owners of your division, also to embrace the concept of board holism, or to act with one voice, which I think many of you would be familiar with. And the third is to serve and to lead. This last one may appear to be a little bit of opposing roles, but they are both very much a part of the role of a school board and trustees themselves. You might, at a low level, serve by authorizing perhaps a particular program or budgeting 1 year for certain quality programs, and aim for, among other things, high academic marks for your students. But the question then becomes, what citizens are you turning out at the end upon graduation? So that's really the big picture. And you really serve all of those within your division. So whereas the other ones were very much school-centric, we have to look at your division as a whole. So it's also incumbent upon you to lead and make progress for the whole division. It's really to make a plan, develop an end goal, or develop that vision for where you want to end up, to take the division and the students, the staff, and in turn the community that you want to, or that you serve, take them down that path with you. So it's a balance between representation and leadership, if it helps to think about it in that way. But it really takes both. Part of the association's standards framework on effective and efficient governance states that an effective board is responsible for developing a vision for schools and education. A copy of the framework is available on our website under the services and trustee education. So if you're on our website, you can see it marked out there in the blue section. If you click on there, and you'll see that E2G logo, and there's a link there that you can click into and see the framework and all 9 points that make it up. So the board does need a vision, but where do you start, and what role does that vision play in the actual day-to-day operations of a division? It starts with and is part of your division's foundation statements. The difficult part sometimes comes when you want to take that into our day-to-day world. So we'll look quickly at the pieces and a quick example of a definition of each of these foundation statements that you see on the screen there. It's important to recognize that divisions often use different terms for their foundation statements, but all divisions, I find, have some form of them. So here, values or beliefs, as some divisions call them. This is really how we see ourselves, or how we'd like to those external to our division to see us. It's about what we treasure or what we aspire to be. It can be concepts like openness, transparency, or inclusiveness, or excellence in academics or sports or the arts. And you might really ask, what is your identifier? I think that that's where you'd start. Then the vision. From the values or beliefs, that then comes your vision. You might think of this as the target at the end of that long path. It's a brief one-sentence statement describing the clear or inspirational long-term desired results from all your division's work. I think a great example of this is, and one that I found was that for the San Diego Zoo. Their vision, it's just clear and simple. It reads, to become a world leader at connecting people to wildlife and conservation. It's quick, it's simple, it's something you can remember, but it really says it all. It says really what their aim is. Then we go on to mission. When you have your mission statement, which details how, when you have your vision statement, mission statement, which details how you will reach the overall goal or endpoint, which is your vision. That's what it is. It lays out a more detailed picture that helps all members of your staff and your community. They see the strategy to achieve that vision. It really gives them direction, or their walking papers. If you think again about the San Diego Zoo, who said they want to become the world leader at connecting people to wildlife and conservation, then their mission statement says that the zoo is a conservation, education, and recreation organization dedicated to the reproduction, protection, and exhibition of animals, plants, and their habitats. Now, I think that's really clear and concise direction. It really tells the employees and their staff and their stakeholders and everybody, this is what we mean by that vision. So let's take a more in-depth look at the development of each of these areas. If you look at values, are the identity of your community, or what it aspires to be, and because this is the root, you need to really engage your community in the development of those values. You really need to know what your community is about. So it's not about the board or the trustees or what they might aspire to be. It's really about the division. So extensive consultations would really be needed when reviewing or developing this platform, because the values are very community specific. Obviously, something that's going to work in one community is not going to work in the other one. There's no one size fits all. Even within a province like Manitoba, which has a relatively small population, when I travel from one end to the other, I can really feel that there are some very specific identifiers for different communities, and they're not all the same. So you may need to assess your community engagement strategy before you even get started. If you take a look at our division dispatches, there's a couple of things on there about community engagement, and that might, give you a couple of ideas if you go towards making a community engagement strategy. The important thing to know is that you can't hope to fully represent or serve your community if you only get input from one part of the community or just brainstorm around your board table. That doesn't really work and would not be reflective of your whole community. So it really takes a lot of time and effort, because these values, they will then in turn direct the pieces that come after that. And I'm going to go into that a bit now so you'll see how important putting something like that is into place. While you want to develop or articulate values that are far-reaching, you still need to be able to assess them from time to time. So values change, as I've just put up there. If you think of it in this way, in the 1960s or let's say 70s, there were actually segregated classrooms for those that we viewed as having learning disabilities. And some of you might even remember this term, that they were called special classes. But today we have inclusive classrooms. There's also the reverse. What would people from the 60s have thought if they would have heard that students are only allowed to bring little plastic knives in their lunch, or maybe not even little plastic ones, nothing like that in their lunch. So things change, and what people think within your community change. So it's always keeping, your finger on the pulse of what's happening. So then if you take this back to the concept of to learn, to serve, and to lead, there are two sides of developing your division's values. Taking the temperature of the community from time to time, make sure that you're still representing their views, the views of the community. But then at the same time, trustees also need to lead their division at times in order to progress. And that's often the tougher role, but we can't still be stuck in the 60s. Sometimes it takes a little nudging to move people forward, and it can be a cop-out to always say, but that's what the majority of my constituents wants. You might have to inform them and educate them in order to move your electorate along. So that's what I mean by leading them as well as serving them. So let's move into the development of the vision then. What do those values look like when you've reached them? What is that going to be your end point down the road? And what does that display of your values look like? What's the clear picture? So you're looking at a one-sentence statement describing the reason an organization or a program exists that is used to help guide the decisions about its priorities, actions, and responsibilities. That's it in a nutshell, I guess. It's a clear, concise sentence and denotes where you want to end up. So this is really your elevator pitch, or if you can imagine yourself, you're riding up an escalator and someone else is going down and they're beside you. Can you actually get your message across in the time it takes to pass? It needs to convince, it needs to be it can't be unfocused and rambling, if you like. So here's another one that I found, Ducks Unlimited. It says, wetlands sufficient to fill the skies and with waterfowl today, tomorrow, and forever. I think that's pretty clear, and it really says where they want to go. People have to know what business or field they're in as well. It's really, what is your raison d'etre? Apple, for example, if you look at it, they aren't really in the computer business, they're in the empowerment business. Molson's, they aren't in the beer business, they're in the party business. So it's really starting with why, I guess. It also has to be something that will inspire the people that you lead in their day-to-day lives. So I have a little story here that I'm going to tell you, but I really think it embodies what that means, even if it's not a company's specific vision. I think this really says it in a nutshell. So the story goes like this. It was the last two games of the 2006 NBA Finals that would take place in Dallas, Texas. Pat Riley, coach of the Miami Heat, he felt certain that his team could beat the Dallas Mavericks in Dallas as long as the team was convinced that they could. The Mavericks had a huge statistical advantage in Dallas, as the team with the home court advantage wins more than 3 out of 4 of every 4 series in the playoffs. This made the Heat's handicap, if they went into a 7th game, unbearably intense. So Riley didn't want to go down there and have to even play that 7th game. So Riley's goal was to stoke his players' desire to win the championship there in the 6th. So instinctively, Riley knew he needed to put his players inside the positive experience of a win in Game 6 that was hard, fast, and definitive. He needed to make that goal feel real and achievable, to synchronize their mindset with his purpose. So that was his vision. Pat took a gamble and told his team the whole story of their victory in a single line. He said, "Everybody, pack for just one day. One shirt, one tie, not 2 days, 3 days, or 4 days. Just one day of dress and change." And that elegant, short story telegraphed Riley's intention for them that there would be no 7th game. The Heat wouldn't need a second chance and a second change of clothes. His implicit tale that he told them, it was because they were coming home on the night of the 6th game as NBA World Champions. He told it, they felt it, and they did it. So the key is really clarity. Distill that idea down to its very essence, and if it can be condensed down, it's a good idea. If not, it might be a bit too fuzzy and not easy to remember and doesn't give good direction. It has to be bold, and it needs to articulate a solid idea. Then we move on to mission. This really puts the meat around the vision. It's about how, if the division is the what, or sorry, if the vision is the what, yes. So for one closer to home, I'll cite your association's mission statement. It is to enhance the work of locally elected school boards through leadership, advocacy, and service to champion the cause of public education for all students in Manitoba. So while the vision is a respected and influential voice for public education and a valued and effective advocate for local education governance, the mission is really about what that means or how to accomplish it, how it's going to be accomplished. You might include your ideas and key measures you'll follow to ensure that success. Or you might also consider what you see as the division's major strengths and assets and how they'll be applied to the path you'll take. So here's one more example, the Mayo Clinic. They say to inspire hope and contribute to health and well-being by providing the best care to every patient through integrated clinical practice, education, and research. It talks about health and well-being, but it also puts specifics around that and how those things will be put to use as part of that. So these foundation statements are there to inform the next. You build upon each other. It starts with the values, then the vision, and then the mission. And with good input from your community and as many people in your community as you can get, then you really start to have a very solid base to steer your division in the direction you want to go. But of course, as you can see, as I think I've been demonstrating, these statements, they're not they're not static, they're really fluid. I gave a couple of examples of how they can change when I spoke about values, and they change over time. They can move with a change in, demographics or leaders in your community. Or in this regard, you need to maybe be particularly mindful of not always going back to the same trough time and time again for input. If you're just, for example, if you're only going to your PACs and say, okay, now we've covered that off and they represent everybody, I'm not too sure that would be valid. Everyone in your community makes up part of the electorate. So these statements, they can change also from internal influences or those from outside. And those influences, they can be, as I've noted there, political, moral, economic, educational, cultural, that's a big one, and on and on. So one other reason to take the temperature of your community is, of course, by engaging the people at the same time. You can also create buy-in and understanding for the path you want to take. So their input is then reflected back in those foundation statements. I think they can really see themselves in there, and if it's really articulated in the way that they talk to you about where they want it to go. So now, in a way, maybe the harder part is actually living those statements. So now that you have all of the major pieces in place, what does that actually look like on the ground? They can't be a vague statement that, you shelve, or in this great show of accountability, you put them up on the wall of your boardroom and then you just forget about them. So like Pat Riley, that NBA coach I just told you about, you have to now use them by living them and using them to inspire others. But really, what does that look like? We'll go through some solid examples. So first, at the board level, at the level that you are sitting at, maybe you want to consider when you are developing your strategic plan, maybe it's a multi-year strategic plan or you're looking at it over the next year. Really, I think it starts with your values, your vision, and your mission. Where are you trying to go and what are you trying to accomplish? If that's the case, when then your strategic plan is really your roadmap for how to get there. If your values and vision statement are solid and they're what you are aspiring to be or where you want to go, then your vision really lays out the details of those. And then there needs to be a plan to show how you will achieve that, which would be your strategic plan. A good touch point is you start to review your strategic plan, maybe annually, or develop a new one, is to first review your foundation statements. And you can keep coming back to your statements if you work as you can work to complete your strategic plan. So that's one use for them. At the board table, if you have a discussion or a debate and then there's really no clearer argument than to point to your foundation statements as a support for your argument. If it's a well-founded argument based upon those foundation statements, it's pretty hard to, defeat that argument and go off in another direction on some other tangent down a rabbit hole. Another example would be when deciding what initiatives to take on in budgets, or if an ad hoc initiative is being proposed or you want to propose it, it needs to be in keeping with the original path that you've chosen. It can also be in times of tough decisions. So then you would look to or turn to these statements. They will have been done in consultation with your electorate, or have you taken a position of leadership and your vision can then focus and direct the decision very quickly. For something as day-to-day as the chair developing the next board meeting agenda, the foundations are something to keep going back to. Your board has decided perhaps on a particular path and where they want to go. So then you as the chair, if you keep your trustees on that path, I think then you can move towards achieving it. So really it's saying, don't let your agenda and discussions at the table get hijacked by these one-offs or special projects. If you as the chair keep going back to values, vision, mission, and then coming out of that your strategic plan, I think that you'll look forward and you can see a lot of progress. So these statements can also serve as part of reporting back to the community, or when you're doing community engagement. If you did your due diligence engaging the community to develop and review the statements, then it really is incumbent upon you to then tell them how you're actually progressing, and if you are progressing or moving ahead. More on living those statements. So the previous slide, it was all at the board table, but what about bringing your staff and community along with your vision? You need to really ignite their interest and excitement. If they are a true reflection, if those statements are a true reflection of input, then people will really see themselves in those statements. The foundation statements inform everything from classroom to boardroom. Whether providing direction to your staff on new initiatives or hearing a proposal from staff or community, the direction or proposal can contain reference to the vision or mission, and really starts to make sense then, and they realize that input was not all for naught, if you like. So if you think of a mission statement that I read you earlier from the Mayo Clinic, it started by saying to inspire hope and contribute to health and well-being. But it's really the rest of the sentence that focuses the people on the areas of health and well-being that they want to concentrate on. And it says every patient through integrated clinical practice, education, and research. So those are the three areas, not just general health and well-being. Those are the areas that they are specifically concentrating on. So when you develop new budgets or approve direction in programming, that will directly affect staff and students. And if they are informed about your vision and mission, this is also sending a message. It's letting the community know that they have direct input into the division, and letting staff know how they can live these statements too. So I'm going to go into this, ends up being not too long of a webinar today. I'm going into our last slide here, and as I said, if you do have any questions, feel free to jot those down anytime in that small window on the bottom left there, and then there's a scroll bar on the very bottom. You can put a question in if you like. I'll go through this slide and then go into questions. So I'm actually going to sum it up by sort of bringing it full circle. The first point in the Standards Framework for Effective and Efficient Governance, or E2G, that I talked about earlier, and that was developed here at the association by your executive after, as a community consultation goes, after they had listened to you. It really states that one of the responsibilities of an effective school board is developing a vision for schools and for education. So once you've established your values, vision, and mission, then you can create and publicize a concise document that articulates all three of these so that they can easily be referred to and explained to the whole division. So I want to leave you with three things to remember as you develop or review your foundation statements. The first one there, it involves effective community engagement of all those in your community. So these statements are not static, as I said. You need to keep going back to your community, and be wary, though, not to make sort of a knee-jerk reaction every 2 years. You hear something that's out there in the news and say, you know what, I think we have to go off in a different direction. Really pause and say, is this going to be short-lived? Take a look at it, get the information from your community before you decide to change your course of action. So a good statement is probably going to be fairly long-lived, but it does merit going back and reviewing that from time to time. It should be far-reaching direction, and then you need to really stay on course. The second one there, once you get direction from your community, don't just pay it the lip service where you listen and then develop your own statements, or develop them, as I said before, in isolation at the board table. They need to be sound, meaningful, and direction-giving foundation statements based on the input that you did receive. So once you complete the exercise of developing them, you go back to the initial community input and see if it's still representative of what you heard. And then finally, embody these statements. There are many ways that a board can do that, and when you think about inspiring all those in your division to do the same, you can progress and accomplish a lot when you are all pulling in the same direction. And you really want to have those people, like Pat Riley's team, pulling in the same direction, and think of the progress that you can make. It can be really great. So I'm going to flip over to our last screen here. And I've got a couple of questions, or a few questions coming up here. How often is it advisable to revisit or redo the vision statements? It's not a bad idea to really give a brief look at them once a year. And when I was saying, not in isolation of your, just at the board table, I think that, a review maybe annually at the board table is not bad, maybe 2 years in a row, but then maybe the third, fourth, or fifth year you want to go back out and really take the pulse of your community and see what they're thinking, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page, also with its meaning and intentions. If you go through a new term and you have some new people that are elected, they won't have been there when those statements maybe were developed. So it's really a good idea to go through and talk about that meaning and intentions, at least on an annual basis. And certainly if you're going to go and develop a new multi-year strategic plan, or maybe start to tweak your strategic plan, that you might do that annually. A board often reviews its strategic plan annually, so that's a good starting point as well. As I talked earlier, as for the community input or any major changes, this would happen less frequently. And it's really hard to say, because it's going to depend on what's happening in your community. Have things changed a lot? And sometimes some of the things that I've seen happen that make it a major change, it might be that your division boundaries have changed, or there's a big change in demographics. I know that some communities are seeing a huge influx into their community, and so they might want to go out and check that and see if they're still on the mark, or if there's a major shift in anything from infrastructure or some major changes happening in the demographics of the students, then it's a good idea to do that then. But it can also be influenced by legislation, by external forces, by culture changing in your community, all of those things. So there's not a hard and fast rule, I guess I'll say, but an annual review, just talking about that at your board table, great idea. Bigger, more solid review a little bit less frequently. So I'm looking, and there's another question here. Oh, it's just, did I miss any earlier webinars on the E2G series? And just, I think I said, this is at the beginning, that this is the first one, but we'll be providing more throughout the year. But if you do miss one, or if you want to share this with your whole board, they are recorded, and they're part of our webinar library that you can see on our website if you go onto the e-learning page, under the services and then resources tab. And as I said too, there's all kinds of E2G resources. There's the 5 to 10 minute videos. They're called division dispatches. You can also find those under e-learning. I also do in-person presentations, and if there's something in this E2G series that has tweaked your interest, it doesn't have to be one of these particular sort of standardized presentations. We can also tweak that to your board itself if there's something in particular that you would like to address. So I've got another question here. I'm just looking. Should trustees be connecting with divisional staff for input, or just the community as a whole? I would say that it is definitely worth looking at both of those. I've done reviews of foundation statements for divisions. I've come in and facilitated those, and they've done them in several ways. They've invited in specific groups, such as the parent advisory councils, the RM or town councils that they work with, city councils, representatives from there. They've also had parent sessions, and then I've seen others where they really go all out and they do surveys. These can be online surveys, but you were talking specifically about divisional staff, and I think that they can be part of that too. I'm working with one board right now where I'm going to be facilitating their strategic planning session. They are going out in advance and doing a lot of surveying, both online, in person, and through hard copy that goes out to their community. But then they are also asking, and there's a forum for their staff to participate as well. It gets sometimes difficult to have all of your staff there, and it sometimes helps focus the message a lot better if they can meet earlier and then have someone speak on their behalf as a representative, bringing their views that way. So really, when you're doing this type of review, having the possibility to ask all kinds of questions or get all kinds of input, but then have someone take a good hard look on how to summarize that can be very helpful as well, and really help focus your discussion as you go through it after. And remember, I will say again, be careful not to jump on one particular issue and have that knee-jerk reaction, and you decide to go off down that rabbit trail or bunny hole or rabbit hole, as they say. So just making sure that your vision and mission that you're using is sound in the first place and really reflective of where you want to take the division, and showing leadership that is where you want to take them. You have to say too, as trustees, you are often some of the most well-informed people when it comes to what's going on in your division. So some part of that might be educating them in the first place, and certainly reflecting back what you've heard from them. So I'll just take a look and see. I think that's the last question up there, so a few questions coming in. As I said before, if there are some other questions that you'd like to follow up on after, or if you're looking to book a particular session or find a particular video, you can always contact me here at the division office. But I'm going to flip over to one last screen here. You'll see at the bottom there, we do have another of these in the E2G series, another webinar coming up in the E2G series, and that's in a month from now on November 25th. And then for December, we are going, the theme is on community engagement, so there won't be a specific webinar, but we will be highlighting a couple of other webinars I did earlier and some division dispatches. And then there's another webinar coming up on February 3rd where we will have a guest presenter talking about how finances and education really fit together. So I hope you have enjoyed this or found something useful that you can take away. And thank you. I see a comment coming up. Thanks for joining me, and hope to see you here again. Take care.